And now it looks like we're recording. Um, and of course, at this exact moment, we start to lose bandwidth. Go technology. Introduce yourself, Joshua.
Okay, so I'm Joshua Hasker. I graduated from Stetson, I think, what was it, two semesters ago, about a year ago, or was it a semester ago? Time tends to fly by pretty quickly when you're no longer in school. So about a year ago, I graduated from Stetson from the honors program. I did the TA for Michael and for Johan that my junior year. Was it my senior year at that point because I took the class a little later. So yeah, that's me. I graduated with my bachelor's in philosophy as well. So that's what I bring to the table.
I think everybody out there probably knows me, but I'm Michael Denner. And I just wanted to lay out some rules and expectations for this. It's a 20-minute podcast. We might go over a little bit. I'm not really great at observing deadlines.
Me neither.
Yeah. And it's totally unrehearsed. And this is not a lecture. This is a conversation between two people who admire one another, and two people who have read the book and thought a lot about the book and talked a lot about the book. Joshua didn't say this, but this book resonated very strongly with his senior research that he wrote in the philosophy department. And I want to talk a little bit about that side of it. But most importantly, maybe this podcast, this conversation will try to draw some lessons or observations about the book, but also about the pandemic that we're all struggling with right now, and the whole reason that you're watching this podcast. So in a sense, my argument will be, and Joshua's argument will be, that this book is important and relevant and smart and has a lot to say about who we are and what we do and about the world. And that's only more true now. That's always true about philosophy. It might not seem that way, but like what makes philosophy important is that it just becomes more and more true the closer to the bone that you get. And we're pretty close to the bone. So 20 minutes, lower your expectations. This is not a lecture. I'm not going to tell you what to think about this book, but this is a conversation between Joshua and me about the book. And I'll lead. Again, this is not rehearsed. So Joshua, for both of us, one of the most significant things about this book is the sudden, abrupt, and I'd argue really unforeseeable shift that Graeber makes at the end of the book in the last chapter, I guess the last chapter and a half, where he suddenly introduces feminist philosophy, care philosophy into this book. And let me just I'm going to say a couple things about it, and then I'm going to let Joshua talk about it from bring things to it. And Joshua, again, I know you haven't thought about this for a while, but like any connections that you can make with Nussbaum, Moyer, a discussion of Agamemnon and Euripides, that's not necessary. But which is a very gendered play, a very gendered conversation that Moyer has with Nussbaum, and it turns out that Bullshit Jobs is a book that is deeply engaged with questions of gender identity. And I'll just say very briefly that gender is really important. Feminist philosophy is really important for Graeber because it offers an alternative to the way that capitalism is currently practiced. And I think that his really brief illustration, and you might not even have noticed it, about the coffee cup is the one that's truly instructive. And Graeber says it's really strange that our economy enshrines production the way that it does, and that when we talk about work and when we talk about the working class, we have this model that we make stuff, that we have inchoate stuff, and then out of that stuff we produce goods that are usable. And he points out that what's really strange about this model is that it overlooks care and maintenance. And he says that what brings value to a cup is not the production of the cup, but in fact the fact that you can wash the cup and use it over and over again. And the reason that we don't properly value that maintenance or care of the cup is because traditionally, for thousands of years, women are the ones who have been tasked with washing. Women are the ones who have been tasked with washing our asses when we're sick. Women have been tasked with washing the asses of babies when they're born. Women have been tasked with care. And by the way, I really want to bring this conversation around to what we're discovering about the importance of social interaction during this time of plague. I think that it's directly relevant to Graeber and to this book. But this is his point. Is like where we went wrong in a lot of places, but in our enshrining of production as a model for work, labor, funny, great word. We've forgotten the importance of care. And the argument that he makes, and this is in his theological bit in the penultimate chapter of the book, I think it's chapter 6, is that like this is an inheritance that we have of the fact that for thousands of years men ran things and women stayed at home. And it's only recently, maybe in the last 150 or 200 years at the outside, and more like the last 50 or 60 years, that we've really started to consider seriously the place of care and what women do as real work. And that's incredible, but it's true. And so he makes that change, and the rest of the book, especially his discussion of universal basic income, is essentially qualified by a reconceptualization of what work really is. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. I think I said what I needed to say about the sudden emergence of gender and care in this book and its importance. But I wanted to hear what Joshua had to say about feminist philosophy. He worked a lot with feminist philosophy in his senior research, and your own interests in gender dynamics and the gendered nature of late capitalism. Hit it.
Yeah, so that is a fascinating point. Is actually the exact point that I was going to hit when you introduced the conversation from the onset. And so I have a lot of working things going on. But there's actually an interview that's obviously not in the book, where he's talking to Corey, I think it's like Dockerow or something along those lines, who's the political activism himself. And he asked Graeber, what's the next step in your research? And Graeber says, well, I mean, in this book, I hint or sort of overtly state feminism and care ethics. And so the next portion of my research is to go into say, like, what's the reconceptualization of our economy after technology automizes everything? What are we going to be interested in? And he says that caring is one aspect and the other aspect is freedom. And so he wants this interplay between caring and freedom. And that's the refocusing of our economy after total sort of automation of technology. And so you brought up this interesting point at the beginning of the lecture about the plague that we're currently going through. And I was listening to an NPR segment, and there was an anthropologist, not David Graeber, but another anthropologist that was talking about humans and what we do to sort of gain control over situations. And one of them is to sort of buy toilet paper, right? Buy all of this toilet paper because we don't really have any sort of control of the situation, because in a flash of a second, 40% of the jobs just went away. And this is David Graeber's point, right? Like 40% of the jobs are absolutely nonsense. And so we don't really have this control factor when our job is bullshit. So what do we do in a situation in which 40% of the jobs can just in a flash be gone? What do? Well, we go buy toilet paper. And that's why David Graeber's result or his conclusion that a universal basic income can't do more harm than the current situation that we're in, right? If we give 40% of Americans access to money to just go out and be sort of culturally invested in whatever they're interested in, that has to be better than this bullshit automation, right? And Corey Dockow responds, or whatever his name is. I apologize if anybody knows him and I'm pronouncing his name. He says what you've just described is YouTube, and it's like a sort of funny moment. Everybody starts laughing. He's like, yeah, but like everybody would be happier in that situation if just we had a UBI, right? If we had the UBI and 40% of Americans went on and just did absolutely nothing with that time, wouldn't they just be happier? But we're in the exact same economic situation that we are in either way, except for you have a drastic increase in happiness.
Although you're not talking here about the pandemic. You're talking
right.
like our current economy.
Yeah.
You have to know that something like 50% of people believe that they're doing active harm to the world, and if their jobs were to disappear, it's not that the world would regain equilibrium, but the world would actually be better, right? This is the definition of a bullshit job.
Yeah.
And so people's anxiety that under UBI people would not work or would not contribute to the economy, Graeber points out, is utterly absurd, because already
they're doing nothing. if they're doing nothing, and they're actively causing harm, as opposed to just
and they're miserable. So again, like this, like his constant. He spends 2 chapters talking about the spiritual harm that working a bullshit job does.
Through the book, yeah,
and it's like, it's so true. All right, now I want to shift things a little bit, and I'm gonna say something. And again, this is not rehearsed, and I haven't thought this through. And I'd love to hear Joshua's reaction to this. My brother, my twin brother, a great guy, smart guy. I really love my brother. He's incredibly successful. He essentially runs a firm that develops and implements software in the world's largest law firms. And he's very wealthy, and his 2 kids. And so I've been talking to him the last couple of days, and something's really struck me about the discoveries that he's making during this pandemic. So for the first time, he has 2 sons. One son is 14, and the other son is 16. And they're at home now. Actually, they're in New Rochelle. So they're really at the epicenter of the pandemic that we're experiencing in the United States. And my brother and his wife are also working at home, and they live in a very nice house, very large house. And all of a sudden, my brother has to care for his 2 sons. He has to get them up. He has to make them breakfast, make them lunch. He has to drive them around what little they need to be driven around. And he has to clean up after them. And he says to me over and over again, it's incredible how much food these kids eat. It's incredible how messy they are. And what occurs to me is, and this is me being the Pollyannish kind of person I am, and I really am. I'm a very optimistic person. One thing that we're going to discover after this pandemic, during this pandemic, is that there are going to be tens of scores of millions of people who are going to realize how valuable bus drivers, nurses, school teachers, lunch ladies suddenly are. And so it's funny, Graeber very early on makes this distinction between shit jobs and bullshit jobs. And he points out that, strangely enough, most shit jobs aren't bullshit jobs, and most good jobs are bullshit jobs. And what he means by that is that these people who are engaged in caring for my brother's children are the very ones who are brown and black. They're the very ones who are one paycheck away from economic ruin. They're the very ones whose position is in every way precarious. And what we're discovering is that they're essential, that human care, the kind of care that bus drivers have for their wards and lunch ladies have for the kids who eat in their cafeterias and elementary school teachers, all of these people are the people that we pay so little, and they bring so much good into the world, and they've remained largely unnoticed by people with bullshit jobs. And maybe we've learned, or we will learn, how important nurses and EMTs and police officers and educators and all these people who are high touch, right? Like Graeber introduces that term, skin jobs, which is awesome. And like there's a whole segment of our economy that's a skin job. And they're skin because they touch people. And now all of a sudden we can't touch one another. And we're learning what an incredible loss that is. And so it turns out that we can do without the bankers and the Wall Street boys. But what we can't do without is the woman who paints our nails or the dude who cuts my hair. And all of a sudden, maybe we're learning the importance of these jobs that have been relegated to secondary status. And again, these jobs that are largely done by women and largely done by brown and black people. And then all of a sudden, like, we're realizing that those jobs are way more important and essential. And I hope that we realize that nurses are heroes.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Like Graeber is he's an anti-establishment anarchist, and he's also profoundly feminist, right? And so when you have this movement, care ethics, which care ethics' fundamental principle is that there's not enough care for the caretakers, right? So those who are doing care work, and you listed a whole bunch of duties that are associated with care ethics, and a majority of them are often women's jobs, right? Because the establishment, for worse, is a man's world, right? And so the women are naturally not allowed into this man's world, and so you have women doing these care jobs, and so it's obvious the parallelism of why Graeber is so naturally attracted to care ethics, because it fundamentally wants to tear down this establishment. And it's sort of the irony that when he gets to his conclusion, he's like, oh, I don't really want to give you policy because policy only feeds into the establishment, right? So let's just sort of tear the establishment down via strikes. And the only way to do that is to sort of give this policy of a UBI in order to give us funds so that we can become politically and socially active, right? So it's sort of uses UBI, even though it's a policy, as a means to an end, right? It's the means to give us our ability to be active and social and to sort of join groups. And I think that your point that this is going to show us, or hopefully show us, the establishment men, that care ethics is important, that, you know, this is that sort of driving point. This is that point at which we say, okay, let's get on board with a UBI. Let's get on board with being socially and politically active, which is the necessity of our political situation in the first place, right? We are required to vote. We're required to be involved. And there's this great quote that he has. I think it's like page 8. I'm not sure if that's the same, where he says that. Let me see. The ruling class has figured out that happy and productive population with free time on their hands is a moral danger, right? Like, this is one of the most powerful quotes, and it's on page 8. It's super earlier in the book. You could easily pass over and forget it and say, oh, I'm not going to read the preface and forget this, like, super important point that he's anti-establishment. He wants to get out of this sort of rut that we've allowed ourselves to get into, and women are a necessity in this process. It's just sort of coupling against that, right? And so he's anti-establishment. He needs, and we need, to sort of be socially and politically active together. And there's not just sort of like men get on board with this. It's like everybody needs to be on board with this, and UBI is a means to an end for that.
Yeah, one of the I have to. One of the things I like most about this book, I think it's chapter 4, which is devoted to Graeber's exploration of the current work world as a form of BDSM,
Hmm.
which I think is just brilliant. And he
Hmm.
talks about the so let me define some terms: the sadism and masochism that are inherent in the current work world. And sadism is the desire to cause harm, and masochism is the desire to be harmed. I've simplified these things intentionally. There's another way to think about it: domination and submission. And I'll point out again that the traditional model for domination and submission is a male-female model, and so this elevation of women, of jobs traditionally gendered as female, is part of Graeber's strategy. Um, uh, and let me say that, like, so one, his exploration of the BDSM of the workplace. I mean, anybody who's worked in the world, it resonates so strongly, and it explains so much. And here's what I really love about this book. There's lots I love about this book, but one of the insights is, like, what makes bullshit jobs, what makes our work life, most people's work life, so miserable, is that they're engaged in a game of BDSM and they don't know the safe word. Like he says at the end of the book, how do you say orange to your boss? Which is awesome. And his answer is UBI. Like,
Hmm.
so follow me on this one. We've all witnessed or been the target of unmitigated, blatant harassment. We've been demeaned, and most of us have put up with it because we're in a position where we're not economically free to tell our boss to take a flying fuck. We're not in a position where we can stand up and we can give a solid beat down to the person who's demeaning us. And that's an awful situation to be in. And that's exact, and Graeber captures it perfectly. It's BDSM without the safe word. And so what's the safe word? And for Graeber, and I'm largely won over by his argument, the safe word is UBI. Like the BDSM of the work world ends with another acronym. So I think this book is really great. I'm gonna end this conversation because we're at 23 minutes. And I'm gonna say like one more minute of stuff, and then I'll let Joshua finish up anything else that he wants to say. And again, hear me out here. I'm being the Pollyannish optimist again, and I really am extremely optimistic person. Um, what I hope is that this pause that this world has taken, and it's unprecedented. Let me step back. Let me say something. Let me observe that I think a lot of people have made a serious mistake, and their claim goes something like, "What we're experiencing is unheralded. It's completely new," and that's actually completely and totally wrong. Um, every day, we're a country of 300 million. Every day for the last 50 years, for the last 100 years, 50 million people have stood up and been in this position. 50 million people have stood up and said, my economic well-being has been completely destroyed. I have no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm bedridden. I have to stay at home. Like you understand that this crisis, when broken down, is not new. But what's new is that we're all experiencing it simultaneously. And so, everybody in the world experiences moments like the one that we're going through now. Moments of disorientation, of disempowerment, of confusion, and of frustration. But what's different now is not that, but that we're all experiencing it simultaneously. And so, let me say something heartening, and let me say something like What I hope is that everyone is discovering who they are. What I hope is that people being trapped at home suddenly realize that they have skills that they didn't realize that they had that they don't have skills that they need and that they now have time to develop. Like, I hope that everybody becomes a better poet and a better cook and a better gardener and a better caregiver and a better lover, because for the first time in our incredibly rushed life, everything is paused. This time, it's called crisis time, and you can look it up. It's a great, like, type in crisis time, and it's a philosophical concept, and it's time that lies outside of our ordinary time. And I hope that we all take advantage of that, and that we come out of this with a soberer, better understanding of not only who we are, but who the people we interact with on a daily basis are. Right? That's what I wanted to say. And you have 2 minutes. Go, Josh, and then I'm just going to stop. Go.
Okay, sounds good. I want to end on a very similar note, and that note is, if you look at the last like 2 to 3 pages of Bullshit Jobs, which are some of the most important pages in the book, even though the entire book is extremely important. He says, like, I don't want to give policy because policy only feeds the establishment. So what do we do? Well, UBI gives us the route to become politically and socially active, and in that, the reason that it's hard for him to give you the route is because the route doesn't exist, and that route is a movement. If you went to Stetson campus and you looked, there'd be a movement for everything except for the bullshit, like anti-bullshit bullshitization of jobs, right? Everything except for that. And so, how I want to end is say, let's not revert back after the pandemic is over and forget about anti-bullshitization of jobs. Make your movements. Now's the time to sort of rally together and realize that everyone is on board. And if you don't grasp the moment now, the moment will be gone. So let's sort of rally around this point and start like realizing that this is an important trek and an important movement to begin. Not even to rally around because it doesn't exist. Let's start the movement.
Fight the power, man. All right, you stay on. I'm going to stop this recording, but we're going to continue our conversation for a bit. Hold on, I'm going to see if I can figure this out.